There is a specific financial trap that targets high-earning women at a rate nearly 40% higher than their male counterparts. And it has nothing to do with spending too much. It has everything to do with how the wealth gap was engineered around your income, and how a system that was never designed for you quietly trained you to finance an image instead of building an empire. Here's the part that should stop you cold. The women most vulnerable to this trap are not broke. They are earning. They are educated. They are working harder than almost anyone around them. And yet, somewhere between the income and the identity, the wealth never accumulates the way it should. Today, we're going to expose exactly why that is, and more importantly, what it would look like if you stopped playing by rules that were written without you in mind. The mainstream financial narrative tells women to budget better, to cut the lattes, to stop emotional spending, to be more disciplined. And while those talking heads were busy making that argument, institutional wealth managers were quietly documenting something completely different. They were noting that women, on average, outperform male investors by 40 basis points annually when given equal access to information. Let that land for a moment. Not worse investors. Not impulsive. Not undisciplined. Outperformers, so why? Does the average woman retire with 40% less wealth than the average man at the same income level? That question is not rhetorical. The answer is structural. And it is deeply, deliberately buried underneath a media landscape that has historically framed women's finances as a personal failure problem rather than a systemic architecture problem. Smart money knows this. Smart money also knows that the moment women begin to see their financial decisions through a structural lens, the entire dynamic shifts. Because what comes next changes the framing entirely. Let's talk about what lifestyle financing actually looks like in 2025. It is not always obvious. It is not always a maxed-out credit card or a car you technically cannot afford. Sometimes it looks like a perfectly reasonable apartment in a neighborhood that costs you 38% of your take-home income. Sometimes it looks like a wardrobe that signals competence in a workplace that still quietly penalizes women who don't look the part. Sometimes it looks like a social circle where financial vulnerability is treated as personal failure rather than a design outcome. The pressure is real. The math behind that pressure is rarely discussed. Here is what is actually happening at the macro level. Consumer debt among women aged 25 to 50 has grown at a rate that outpaces income growth in that same demographic for the last 8 consecutive years. Not because women are reckless. Because inflation, stagnant wage growth in female-dominated industries, and the invisible premium of what researchers call the pink tax have quietly widened the gap between what your lifestyle costs and what your income was ever designed to support. This is the trap. Not a character flaw, a structural mismatch. And the financial media, the one telling you to track your subscriptions and automate your savings, has almost never addressed the root cause. There is a concept in behavioral economics called identity-consistent spending. It describes the very human tendency to spend money in ways that confirm who you believe you are, or who you need others to believe you are. For women navigating corporate environments, social hierarchies, and the invisible tax of being taken seriously, identity-consistent spending is not vanity. It is often perceived as a survival mechanism. The problem is, it compounds in silence. Every month that income goes toward maintaining the image of financial stability. Instead of building the infrastructure of actual financial stability, the gap widens. And here is the behavioral economics layer that nobody talks about. The more sophisticated your financial image becomes, the harder it is to admit the gap. Which means the correction gets delayed, which means compound interest, that extraordinary force that builds wealth silently over time, starts working against you instead of for you. The lifestyle financing trap is not just a spending problem. It is a compounding silence problem. And the longer it runs, the more expensive the reset becomes. Let's introduce the number that should be at the center of every financial conversation you have in your 30s and 40s. Women live, on average, 5 to 7 years longer than men. That is not a fun fact. That is a financial variable with enormous consequences. It means your retirement savings need to stretch further. It means healthcare costs in your final years are statistically higher. It means the gap between what you will need and what the traditional financial planning model was designed to provide for someone with your life expectancy is not small. And yet, most mainstream retirement calculators were built on male mortality averages. Most financial products were structured around a career arc that assumes no career gaps for caregiving. Most of the advice given to women about retirement was written by people who were not modeling your specific financial reality. Smart money has always known this. They factor longevity into every female client portfolio differently. They weight inflation hedging assets more aggressively. They plan for healthcare cost escalation specifically. What they build for women with real wealth looks nothing like the generic advice you have been given. Here is where this gets asymmetric. Everything we have covered so far is the cost side of this equation. The structural mismatch, the compounding silence, the longevity gap. But there is an opportunity embedded inside every single one of these pressure points. And this is the part that most financial media, built for a different audience, has never directly handed to you. The women who break this cycle do not do it by simply earning more. Earning more into a broken system just accelerates the same trap at a higher income level. The shift happens when income stops being the primary wealth vehicle and assets take over. Institutional portfolios do not grow because someone worked harder. They grow because capital is working while the person is not. The asymmetric opportunity here is this. Every dollar that is currently financing a lifestyle is a dollar that is not compounding inside an asset. And over a 10-year horizon, the spread between those two paths is not a small difference. It is often the difference between financial optionality and financial dependency at 60. Leaving now means leaving before we walk through what that pivot actually looks like, and what the women who have made this shift did structurally, not just behaviorally. Let's talk about what the structural pivot actually requires. Not the motivational version of this, the architectural version. Step 1 is the most counterintuitive thing most financial advice will never tell you. Before you optimize your spending, you need to audit your income ceiling. Most lifestyle inflation among women is not driven by excess. It is driven by an income that was never allowed to reach its fair market value. The gender wage gap in 2025 is not a blunt instrument anymore. It is nuanced. It clusters by industry, negotiation history, career gap timing, and something researchers call the motherhood penalty, a documented reduction in earning offers that follows any visible association with caregiving responsibilities. The women closing this gap are not doing it by spending less. They are doing it by aggressively repricing their labor, negotiating with market data, not emotion, and building income streams that sit outside the negotiation entirely. That is the structural move that lifestyle financing hides from view. Because when you are managing image maintenance, you do not have the mental bandwidth or the capital to build the second income stream that actually changes your trajectory. Most people here invest more and think it is a discipline conversation. It is not. It is a capital allocation architecture conversation. The discipline comes after the system is built, not before. Let's close the retirement gap loop with the actual framework, because this deserves to be explicit. The institutional approach to female client retirement planning centers on 3 specific adjustments that retail financial planning almost never applies. First, the longevity buffer. Institutional portfolios for women are structured with a minimum of 7 additional years of withdrawal capacity beyond the standard model. That is not standard advice. That is institutional infrastructure. Second, inflation-linked asset weighting. Because longer life expectancy means more exposure to inflation erosion, smart money overweights assets that historically outpace inflation over 20-plus year horizons. That includes real assets. That includes equity exposure maintained later into the investment horizon than the traditional glide path recommends. Third, liquidity staging for healthcare. High net worth female portfolios are structured with specific liquidity reserves earmarked for healthcare cost escalation in the final decade of retirement. This is not emotional planning. This is mathematical modeling applied to your specific demographic reality. None of this was built for retail consumers. None of this was handed to you by the financial media ecosystem that has spent 30 years telling women to save more and spend less. But you have it now. And that changes what is possible from this point forward. So let's bring this full circle. The title of this video stated something uncomfortable: that you might be financing a lifestyle you cannot afford, and that the people around you might already sense it. Here is the truth underneath that discomfort. The lifestyle financing trap was not built by your decisions alone. It was built by a wage structure that undervalued your labor, by a financial media landscape that spent decades treating your spending as a character problem instead of a structural outcome, by a retirement planning industry that modeled your future using numbers that were never calibrated to your life expectancy, your career arc, or your actual risk profile. The women who escape this trap do not do it through shame. They do it through clarity. They see the system clearly. They reprice their labor aggressively. They redirect capital into compounding assets before the lifestyle expands to absorb it. They plan for a longer life with the precision that life deserves. And they stop waiting for a financial system that was not designed for them to suddenly start working in their favor. You now have the structural map. The macro thesis was never that you are failing. The macro thesis is that the system was designed with a gap, and you were handed the bill for it. The hidden risk was never the lifestyle itself. The hidden risk was continuing to finance it without ever building the asset base that makes the lifestyle sustainable. That distinction is everything. Here is the question worth sitting with. If every dollar you redirected from lifestyle maintenance into a compounding asset began working right now, what would your financial position look like at 55? Not what you hope, what the math actually produces. Because the women who ask that question seriously and then answer it honestly are the ones who stop reacting to their financial situation and start designing it. The gap between where you are and where you could be is not an income problem. It is a capital direction problem. And that is entirely within your control to solve. The only question left is, what will you redirect first?